My son was sitting in my chair when I walked into the conference room. Not beside it. Not across from it. In it. The leather chair at the head of the table that I had used for 23 years. Daniel looked up when I entered. For half a second, something changed in his face. Then it disappeared. Dad, I wasn't sure you'd come. There were 6 people around that table. My accountant. 2 senior managers, a representative from the bank, a lawyer I had never met, and Daniel. My only son. A folder sat in front of him, bearing the name of the company I had spent 34 years building. Hale and Mercer Restoration. Daniel slid it toward me. You should read page 4. I didn't touch it. 3 days earlier, my access card had stopped working. The next morning, my company email had been disabled. Then the bank called asking me to confirm changes to our corporate accounts. Changes I had never authorized. That was when I called Margaret Shaw, my lawyer of 17 years. Now she stood beside me carrying a thin black folder. Daniel's attorney adjusted his glasses. Mr. Hale, the documents establish that Daniel now holds controlling authority. Considering your age and the company's recent growth, Daniel believes a transition in leadership is in everyone's best interest. Daniel finally looked at me. This isn't personal, Dad. That hurt more than if he'd insulted me. I remembered running behind his bicycle when he was 7, one hand gripping the back of his seat while he shouted for me not to let go. I remembered giving him his first job after college. I remembered how proud I'd been the first time he introduced himself to a client as my son. Now he was sitting in my chair telling me taking my life's work wasn't personal. You always said this company would be mine someday, he said quietly. I'm just trying to protect it before things start slipping. There it was. Not hatred. Certainty. Daniel truly believed he was entitled to what I'd built because, eventually, he expected to inherit it. I looked at Margaret. She didn't argue. She didn't accuse Daniel of stealing. She didn't challenge the bank representative or even open her folder. Instead, she sat across from my son and studied the papers for several seconds. Then she looked up. Daniel, before we discuss any of this, I have one question. His attorney leaned forward. Margaret tapped one document with her finger. Who witnessed your father's signature? Silence. Daniel's expression changed. His attorney slowly turned toward him, and I watched the color drain from my son's face. I didn't understand why. Not yet. Because 11 months earlier, my daughter had tried to warn me that something was wrong. I didn't believe her. Worse, I believed Daniel instead. And what Margaret was asking about that morning had begun with the very thing my daughter had begged me to look at. But to understand how my own son ended up sitting in my chair, claiming the company I'd spent 34 years building, you need to know what happened 11 months earlier. And if stories about family, betrayal, and hard-earned justice are your kind of stories, subscribe to the Stories Time Forgot. Because the first warning didn't come from a lawyer. It came from my daughter. And I ignored it. 11 months earlier, Daniel was still the son I trusted most. That's difficult for me to admit now. My daughter Claire had worked at Hale and Mercer for nearly 9 years. She handled vendor contracts and purchasing, while Daniel managed operations and brought in new clients. They couldn't have been more different. Daniel could walk into a room full of strangers and leave knowing everyone's name. Claire questioned everything. Invoices, contracts, expenses. Even me. At the time, I thought Daniel had inherited my instincts. I thought Claire had inherited her mother's talent for worrying. One Tuesday afternoon, she appeared in my office carrying 3 invoices. Dad, do you have a minute? If this is about Daniel again, no. Her expression tightened. You don't even know what I'm going to say. I took off my glasses. All right, what is it? She placed the invoices on my desk. All 3 were from a consulting company called Northbridge Solutions. The amounts weren't enormous. $12,000, $18,000, $21,000. But I didn't recognize the name. Daniel approved these, Claire said. He runs operations. He's allowed to approve vendors. I know. Then, what's the problem? She pulled out another page. Northbridge has been billing us every month since January. I looked through the paperwork. Market analysis, expansion consulting, logistics planning. Nothing immediately looked unusual. Have you asked your brother? Yes. And? He told me to stay in my department. I almost smiled. That sounded like Daniel. Claire didn't. Dad, I've tried finding out what they actually do for us, Nobody seems to know. Before I could answer, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He glanced at the invoices and sighed. Seriously, Claire? She folded her arms. Then explain them. Daniel walked inside. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten her. He simply sat across from me and explained that Northbridge was helping him research commercial expansion into 2 neighboring counties. Then he looked at his sister. You've spent 6 months fighting every change I've proposed. I'm questioning $51,000. Because you don't trust me. No, because that's my job. Daniel looked at me. And that's where I made the mistake. I didn't investigate. I mediated. Enough, I said. We're family. Claire stared at me. That's exactly why you should look. I remember those words now. At the time, they irritated me. Daniel had doubled our commercial contracts in 3 years. Claire had recently opposed 2 of his expansion plans. Their arguments were becoming constant, and I convinced myself this was another one. So I handed the invoices back. Daniel explained them. Claire didn't move. Dad, I said enough. Something in her face changed. Not anger. Disappointment. She gathered the papers and walked toward the door. Then she stopped. Just promise me one thing. What? If Northbridge sends another invoice, don't ask Daniel about it first. I frowned. Why? She looked directly at her brother. Ask whoever owns Northbridge. Daniel said nothing. And neither did I. That was the first time my daughter tried to warn me. It wouldn't be the last. Claire waited almost 3 weeks before bringing up Northbridge again. This time, she didn't come to my office with invoices. She came with a photograph. Tell me what you see. She placed her phone on my desk. It showed a small brick building between a laundromat and an insurance office. The windows were covered from inside, no company sign, no cars outside. I looked at her. What am I supposed to be seeing? That's Northbridge Solutions. I frowned. Claire swiped to another photograph. A directory beside the entrance listed 6 businesses. Northbridge wasn't one of them. I drove there yesterday, she said. The address on every invoice leads to that building. You drove there? Yes. Claire, this is getting ridiculous. Maybe. So I called the property manager. She placed a printed email beside the phone. They've never had a tenant called Northbridge Solutions. That got my attention. For the first time, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Then where are the checks going? Electronic transfers. To what bank? I can't see the receiving account. Daniel changed the permissions on vendor payments 4 months ago. I looked up. He did what? Before Claire could answer, someone knocked. Daniel. Sometimes I wonder whether he had learned to recognize the sound of trouble before it reached him. Claire didn't bother hiding the papers. Northbridge doesn't exist at the address we're paying. Daniel looked at the photograph. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not cruelly. Almost with relief. Oh, that's what this is about. Claire stared at him. $51,000 has gone to a company with a false address. It's not false. Daniel pulled out his phone. Northbridge is run by an independent consultant named Eric Lawson. He works remotely. That's his registered mailing address. Then why doesn't the property manager know the company? Because Eric rents a private mailbox through another business in the building. Daniel looked at me. Dad, this is exactly what I've been talking about. Claire sees something unfamiliar and immediately assumes someone's stealing. I never said stealing. You didn't have to. Then he showed me emails. Dozens of them. Market reports, population projections, competitor pricing, notes about expansion. It looked legitimate. And, more importantly, it looked like work I hadn't known Daniel was doing. I felt embarrassed for doubting him. Claire read several emails. Her confidence didn't disappear, but I saw uncertainty enter her face. Daniel noticed it too. If you wanted these, he said quietly, you could have asked me. Claire handed back his phone. I did. Nobody spoke. I should have stopped there and called the bank. I should have asked our accountant to verify every payment independently. Instead, I looked at my children and saw a brother and sister who had been competing for my approval since they were teenagers. And once again, I chose peace over answers. Claire, leave Northbridge alone. She stared at me. Then she reached into her folder. All right. She placed one final document on my desk. But before I do, you should know this. It was a copy of the authorization form used 4 months earlier to expand Daniel's control over vendor payments, the same change that had prevented me from seeing where the Northbridge transfers were going. My name was at the bottom. My signature was underneath it. I recognized it immediately. There was only one problem. I had never signed that document. For several seconds, I just stared at the signature. It looked like mine. Same slant. Same oversized H. Even the little break in the final stroke that had appeared after arthritis started stiffening my hand. But I knew I hadn't signed it. Where did you get this? Accounting archive, Claire said. Daniel stepped closer. Dad, you did sign it. I looked at him. No. His confidence didn't disappear. Instead, he seemed confused. It was after the Patterson meeting. You were rushing to your dentist appointment. I brought you several documents. That stopped me. I remembered the day. I remembered Daniel standing in my office with a stack of papers. And I remembered signing some of them without reading every page. That was the problem with 34 years of trust. Eventually, you stop checking the hand that gives you the pen. You signed 3 documents, Daniel continued. Vendor renewals, the equipment lease, and that authorization. Claire shook her head. Convenient. Claire, enough. No, Daniel. If Dad signed it, show us the original. Daniel's jaw tightened. The bank has it. Then we'll ask them. I looked from one child to the other. For the first time, I didn't know which one I believed. Then Daniel said something that shifted the room. Dad, do you remember forgetting the Whitmore inspection? I did. I'd written down the wrong date, and arrived nearly 2 hours late. And the Miller estimate? He continued. You quoted them using last year's material costs. That has nothing to do with this. It does if you're forgetting things. Claire's face hardened. Don't do that. Do what? Pretend it isn't happening? Daniel wasn't shouting. That made it worse. He sounded concerned. Dad, you've worked 6 days a week since Mom died. You're exhausted. Maybe you signed something and genuinely don't remember. And there it was. A possibility I hated more than accusing my own son. What if he was right? I was 69. I had been forgetting appointments, misplacing keys, walking downstairs and occasionally wondering why I'd gone there. Ordinary things, perhaps. But Daniel gave those ordinary things a different meaning. Claire touched the authorization. Then verify it. Daniel sighed. I have a client meeting. Of course you do. He turned toward me. I'm not your enemy, Dad. I'm trying to keep this company from falling behind. Then he left. Claire waited until his footsteps disappeared. Do you see what he just did? I didn't answer. He made you question yourself instead of answering the question. That angered me because part of me knew she was right. But another part remembered Daniel at 16, sleeping beside my hospital bed after my first heart scare. This wasn't a stranger I was investigating. This was my son. I'll speak to the bank, I said. Claire studied my face. When? Tomorrow. She nodded slowly. But tomorrow came. Then a major client called. Then a supplier problem erupted. And by Friday, I still hadn't contacted the bank. Claire did. What she learned wasn't proof that Daniel had forged my signature. But it revealed something neither of us expected. The bank didn't have the original authorization. According to their records, the original was still inside my company. And the employee listed as having verified it was someone I knew very well. Someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near that document. The name on the verification record was Robert Mercer. I read it twice. Then a third time. That can't be right. Claire sat across from me in my office. That's what the bank has. Robert Mercer wasn't an employee. He was the Mercer in Hale and Mercer. My former business partner, but at just time and starry so. And he'd been dead for almost 2 years. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Robert and I had started the company with 1 truck, borrowed tools, and $8,000 between us. When cancer took him, I lost more than a partner. I lost the man who had stood beside me for 32 years. After his death, I bought his remaining ownership interest from his estate. His name stayed on the building because removing it felt like erasing him. Claire pointed to the authorization. The form lists Robert as the witness and verifier. I looked at her. She tapped the line beneath my signature. Our bank required a company witness to confirm that the person signing had actually signed the authorization in their presence. And beside that field were the words, Robert Mercer. I felt something tighten in my chest. That could be an old employee code. I thought that too. She slid another page toward me. The verification was entered using Robert's credentials. I stared at her. Those were disabled after he died. They were supposed to be. That word stayed between us. Supposed. Who could reactivate them? Claire hesitated. Someone with administrative access. Daniel had administrative access. So did 2 other senior employees. I stood and walked toward the window. For the first time, this no longer felt like a disagreement between my children. But I still couldn't make myself say what Claire wanted me to say. Dad. Don't. You know what this looks like. I know what it looks like. That's not the same as knowing what happened. She became quiet. Then she said, "That's fair." I turned around. There was no satisfaction on her face. "No, I told you so." That somehow made it worse. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Her eyes narrowed. "I did. No. I mean before Northbridge." Claire looked down. And suddenly I realized there was another conversation happening. One I hadn't known about. "Claire?" She took a breath. "6 months ago, Daniel asked me to approve a change to the company's succession records." My stomach dropped. "What change?" "He wanted language added giving him temporary executive authority if you became medically unable to run the company." I stared at her. "He told me it was standard planning. Why didn't you tell me?" I tried. Then I remembered. A Sunday dinner at my house. Claire and Daniel arguing in the kitchen. Claire telling me Daniel was trying to control everything. Me telling her she was jealous because I'd promoted him to vice president. I had walked away before she could explain. My own words came back to me. "Your brother is trying to prepare for the future. Maybe you should support him for once." I sat down. "What happened to the succession change?" "I refused to approve it." "And Daniel?" "He said he'd handle it another way." A chill moved through me. Claire reached across the desk. "Dad, we need to take this to Margaret." I almost agreed. Almost. But before I made the call, I decided there was one thing I needed to hear first. Daniel's explanation. So I asked him to come to my office. 20 minutes later, he arrived carrying an envelope. He looked at Claire, then at the papers between us. His expression didn't change. "I figured she'd eventually show you." He placed the envelope in front of me. Inside was a copy of Robert Mercer's old credential recovery request. And beneath it was a handwritten note. The handwriting looked familiar. Mine. Daniel pulled out a chair. "Before you accuse me of anything," he said quietly, "you should probably remember what you asked me to do after Robert died." Daniel pushed the envelope toward me. "After Robert died, we couldn't access half the old vendor files, remember?" I did. Robert had handled several accounts personally, and untangling his records had taken months. Daniel pointed to the handwritten note. "You told me to get his credentials restored temporarily so we could recover the files." I picked it up. "Daniel, get Robert's account reopened if that's what it needs. We can't lose those records." Underneath were my initials. They looked genuine. Because they were. I remembered writing it. Claire leaned forward. "Temporarily." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. Then why were Robert's credentials used 18 months later to witness Dad's authorization?" Daniel's expression tightened. "They weren't supposed to be." For once, he didn't have an immediate answer. He took the authorization and studied the witness field. Then, he shook his head. "This could be a system error." Claire almost laughed. "A dead man witnessing Dad's signature is a system error?" His credentials were reactivated. Maybe the system automatically attached his old verification profile. That doesn't make sense. "To you." Daniel looked at me. "Dad, you asked me to restore the account." I did. "If it never disabled it again, that's an administrative mistake, not fraud." And there it was. Just enough truth to make the accusation less certain. I had authorized the restoration. Robert's credentials had legitimately been reopened. And Daniel wasn't the only person with administrative access. Claire wasn't convinced. "Then let's ask it." Daniel shrugged. "Please do." That surprised both of us. So I called Martin Ellis, the outside technician who maintained our systems. I put him on speaker. Martin confirmed that Robert's account had been restored after his death to recover archived files. Then I asked the question that mattered. Was it ever disabled again? A pause. I'd have to check the logs. How long? Give me a day. Daniel stood. Good, check everything. He looked at Claire. And when you find out this was a clerical mistake, maybe you'll finally stop treating me like I'm trying to rob my own family. His voice wasn't angry. It sounded hurt. That stayed with me after he left. Because I remembered another Daniel. 22 years earlier. A 13-year-old boy standing in our garage after Claire accused him of taking $20 from her room. He hadn't taken it. We found the money inside one of her school books 2 days later. Daniel had cried when I apologized. You believed her before you believed me. Standing in my office all those years later, I wondered if I was doing it again. Claire must have seen it on my face. Dad, this isn't $20. I know. Then don't let an old memory answer a new question. The next afternoon, Martin called me back. I expected him to tell me someone had forgotten to disable Robert's account. Instead, he said something that made me sit down. Mr. Hale, Robert's credentials were disabled exactly when they were supposed to be. I gripped the phone. Then, how were they used 4 months ago? They were reactivated. By who? Another pause. I can't tell from the basic log. My disappointment must have been obvious, because Martin continued. But I can tell you when. I looked at Claire. When? 23 minutes before your authorization was entered. Neither of us spoke. Then Martin added one more thing. And whoever reactivated Robert's account didn't do it from inside your office. I felt my stomach tighten. Where did they do it? Martin hesitated. From a remote login tied to a company-issued laptop. I already knew what Claire was going to ask. How many people had that kind of access? Martin checked. 3. Claire reached for a pen. Who? He gave us the first 2 names. Then the third. And when I heard it, I finally understood why Claire had been afraid. The third name wasn't Daniel. It was Claire. I stared at the phone. Say that again. Martin repeated it. The laptop assigned to Claire Hale has remote administrative access. Claire went completely still. That's impossible. Martin explained that the log could identify the company laptop associated with the remote session, but not necessarily the person sitting behind it. Still, the implication was ugly. Claire's laptop. Robert's dead account. My signature. For the first time since she'd brought me those invoices, Claire looked frightened. Dad, I didn't do this. I wanted to believe her immediately. But that was exactly what I'd been telling myself about Daniel. Where was your laptop that day? She thought for a moment. At work, probably in my office. Probably? I don't carry it everywhere. I rubbed my forehead. Daniel had motive. Claire had a machine connected to the evidence. And I was standing between 2 children, realizing I no longer knew which one was telling me the truth. Martin, I said, don't tell anyone about this. I won't. And keep looking. Quietly. If you find anything that tells us who actually used that laptop, call me. I will. After the call ended, Claire closed the office door. You think I did it. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The words hit me because Daniel had said exactly the same thing weeks earlier. Claire noticed too. Her eyes filled, but she refused to cry. Ask yourself why I would forge your signature to give Daniel more control. I don't know. Exactly. Unless you were trying to make it look like he did. The moment I said it, I regretted it. Claire stepped back as though I'd struck her. Wow. Claire. No. That's what you really think of me? I don't know what to think anymore. She picked up her folder. You've known for weeks that something is wrong. Every time the evidence points toward Daniel, you find a reason to explain it away. The first time it points toward me, you accuse me in 30 seconds. Then she walked out. I didn't stop her. That may be the moment I regret most. Not because Claire had all the answers. She didn't. But because she had spent months trying to protect me, and when she finally needed my trust, I gave her suspicion instead. 2 days later, she resigned. No argument. No dramatic goodbye. She left her company keys with my assistant and sent me a 4-line email thanking me for the opportunity to work at Hale and Mercer. At the bottom she wrote, I love you, Dad. But I can't keep proving I'm your daughter every time Daniel tells you I'm his enemy. I read that sentence more times than I care to admit. Daniel didn't celebrate her departure. If anything, he seemed concerned. She'll come back, he told me. Give her some space. That made believing him even easier. Over the next several months, I gave Daniel more responsibility. Not because he demanded it. Because with Claire gone, someone had to carry the load. He began attending bank meetings without me, handling vendor approvals, reviewing contracts, taking calls I used to take myself, and slowly, almost invisibly, the company began running through him. Then one evening, nearly 7 months after Claire resigned, my phone rang. It was Martin. I hadn't spoken to him since the investigation. His voice sounded different. "Mr. Hale, you asked me to keep looking into that remote login and call if I found something definite." I stood up. "You found something?" "Yes." "Was it Claire?" A pause. "No." I closed my eyes. Martin continued. "Claire's laptop made the connection, but she wasn't the person using it." "How can you know that?" "Because I found the security camera archive from that night." My hand tightened around the phone. "And who was?" Martin took a breath. "I think you need to see this yourself." Martin came to my house that night. I didn't ask Claire to come. Not yet. Some part of me was terrified of calling my daughter only to discover that I'd been right to doubt her. Martin opened his laptop at my kitchen table. "The camera system overwrites footage after 90 days, he said. "That's why the regular archive was gone when I first checked." "Then, how do you have it?" I kept looking. He turned the laptop toward me. I remembered we migrated the security system to a new server around that time. Migrations sometimes create temporary backups, so I went through the old server records to see if anything survived. And I found a backup nobody deleted. He opened a video. The timestamp showed 9:45 p.m. Claire's office was empty. 30 seconds later, someone entered. "Daniel." I stopped breathing. He switched on Claire's desk lamp, sat in her chair, and opened her laptop. For almost 4 minutes, he worked without looking away from the screen. Then he closed the laptop and left. Martin froze the image. The timestamp matched the remote login that had reactivated Robert Mercer's credentials. 23 minutes later, my authorization form had been entered into the system. I stared at Daniel's face on the screen. There was no misunderstanding left. No sibling rivalry. No forgotten appointment I could blame on my age. My son had used Claire's computer, and then he'd watched me suspect her for it. He knew, I whispered. Martin looked at me. He knew I'd think it was Claire. That realization hurt more than the forged signature. Daniel hadn't simply protected himself. He had given me someone else to blame. His own sister. I remembered Claire standing in my office. The first time it points toward me. "You accuse me in 30 seconds. I had done exactly what Daniel needed me to do. "Can you prove what he did on the laptop?" Martin shook his head. "The footage proves he used it at the time of the login. The system logs show Robert's account was reactivated during that session. But I can't prove Daniel personally created the authorization form from this alone." Not enough. For the first time, I understood that knowing the truth and proving it were two different things. "Make copies," I said. I already did. The next morning, I called Claire. She answered after the 5th ring. "Dad?" Hearing her voice nearly broke me. "I owe you an apology." Silence. Not forgiveness. Not relief. Just silence. "I know who used your laptop." Another pause. "Daniel?" "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I need you to come home." "Why?" "Because you were right." Her answer came quietly. I didn't want to be right. That sentence stayed with me. Claire arrived that evening. I showed her the footage. She watched it once. Then again. She didn't cry. She didn't say "I told you so." Instead, she asked the question I should have asked months earlier. "What else has he changed?" The next morning, we called Margaret Shaw. She listened, without interrupting. When I finished, I expected anger. Instead, she asked for every document Daniel had touched during the previous year. Bank authorizations, vendor contracts, corporate records, succession paperwork, everything. Then she gave me one instruction. "Do not confront your son." "Why?" "Because right now, Daniel thinks you still trust him." I looked at Claire. Margaret continued. "If he's been changing documents, we need to know what he was trying to accomplish before he realizes we're looking." For 12 days, I went to work and acted like nothing had changed. I drank coffee with my son, discussed clients, asked about expansion, and every time Daniel called me Dad, I wondered which version of him I was looking at. On the 13th day, Margaret called. I found Northbridge. I stood up. Who owns it? There was a pause. That's not the question you should be asking. My stomach tightened. What should I be asking? Margaret's voice became very quiet. Ask why Northbridge has been receiving money from your company while financing Daniel's attempt to take it from you. I met Margaret at her office that afternoon. Claire came with me. Margaret had covered her conference table with documents. Northbridge invoices, bank records, corporate filings, and something I hadn't seen before. A loan agreement. Margaret pushed it toward me. Northbridge isn't financing Daniel by giving him money directly. Then what is it doing? It paid $140,000 to a company called Dar Holdings. I looked at Claire. Never heard of it. Margaret turned over the next page. Daniel Hale registered Doter Holdings 18 months ago. My stomach tightened. Claire whispered, before the first Northbridge invoice. Exactly. Margaret showed us the transfers. Money left Hale and Mercer as consulting fees to Northbridge. Northbridge then sent money to Door Holdings under what it called a private business loan. Daniel controlled Dr. I stared at the numbers. So he was taking money from my company. That's what it appears to be, but that's only half of it. Margaret opened another document. Daniel had used Daughter to purchase an option tied to shares in Hale and Mercer. I frowned. Shares from who? Robert's estate. That hit me like a fist. I bought Robert out after he died. Most of his interest, yes. Margaret pointed to the agreement. But a small block remained in a family trust while the estate was being settled. Daniel negotiated an option to acquire it. Claire leaned forward. Would that give him control? No. Margaret placed another document beside it. But this might. It was a corporate authorization dated 6 weeks earlier. My signature appeared at the bottom. Above it was language granting. Daniel expanded executive authority and allowing him to exercise voting rights on my behalf if I became unable or unwilling to perform certain management duties during a transition. I read the word twice. Unwilling? Margaret nodded. He didn't need to prove you were incompetent. He only needed enough paperwork to claim you'd already approved a transition. Suddenly, Daniel's comments about my memory felt different. The missed inspection. The outdated estimate. His concern about my exhaustion. He hadn't necessarily been trying to prove I was sick. He'd been building a story in which stepping aside looked reasonable. Claire's voice hardened. And Dad never signed this. No. Margaret pointed beneath my signature. There it was again. The witness field. Robert Mercer. A dead man had supposedly watched me sign another document. I looked at Margaret. So that's it, we have him. She shook her head. Not yet. My frustration spilled out. Margaret, Robert has been dead for 2 years. And Daniel knows that. The room became quiet. She leaned back. If Daniel knowingly submitted this, exactly as we're seeing it, it's an extraordinary mistake. Claire understood before I did. You think there's another version? I think we should assume Daniel believes he has an explanation. That frightened me more than certainty would have. Margaret gathered the papers. We don't confront him until he commits to the documents he's relying on. 3 days later, Daniel did it for us. At 8:12 Monday morning, my access card stopped working. By noon, my company email was disabled. The following morning, the bank called about changes to our corporate accounts. And that afternoon, an email arrived from Daniel's attorney. A formal meeting had been scheduled. Daniel was asserting controlling authority over Hale and Mercer. I forwarded it to Margaret. She called less than a minute later. Don't respond. What do we do? Attend. And if he produces the authorization? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Let him. That's when I understood. We weren't going into that conference room to convince Daniel we'd caught him. We were going to find out whether he was willing to stake everything on a document bearing the signature of a man who had been dead for 2 years. So 3 days later, I walked into that conference room and found my son sitting in my chair. Now I understood what Margaret knew. Daniel didn't know that I understood it too. His attorney slid the authorization across the table. Mr. Hale, your signature is here. The document grants Daniel transitional authority, including the voting rights necessary to manage the company. Margaret studied the page. Then Margaret asked the question everything had been leading toward. Daniel, Who witnessed your father's signature? Daniel's face lost its color. His attorney frowned. The witness is identified on the document. I know, Margaret said. I'm asking your client. Daniel swallowed. Robert Mercer. And Robert personally watched your father sign this? Daniel hesitated. His attorney turned toward him. Daniel? It was processed through Robert's credentials. Margaret shook her head. That wasn't my question. She pointed to the line beneath my signature. This field certifies that Robert Mercer personally witnessed Thomas Hale sign this authorization. Did he? Daniel stared at the document. Nobody moved. Finally, he said, there must have been an administrative error. Margaret opened her black folder. Robert Mercer died 22 months before this document was signed. The bank representative immediately stopped taking notes. Daniel's attorney leaned toward him. You told me the execution records were valid. They are. Then explained the witness. Daniel's composure cracked. Not completely. Just enough. This company used Robert's account after his death. Dad authorized that himself. There it was. The explanation Margaret had predicted. She nodded. Yes. Thomas authorized temporary restoration of Robert's account to recover archived records. For half a second, Daniel looked relieved. Then Margaret continued. That authorization does not allow a dead man to witness a signature. Silence. Simple. No complicated corporate law. No loophole. A dead man could not stand in a room and watch me sign a document. Margaret placed another page on the table. And we have the system logs showing Robert's credentials were reactivated 23 minutes before an earlier authorization bearing the same witness certification was entered. Then came another page. And security footage showing you using Claire Hale's laptop during that reactivation. Daniel looked at me. For the first time that morning, the confidence was gone. Dad, listen to me. I said nothing. Margaret wasn't finished. She placed the Northbridge records beside the authorization. We also have payments from Hale and Mercer to Northbridge Solutions, followed by transfers from Northbridge to Duar Holdings. Daniel's attorney looked down sharply. What's Duar Holdings? Daniel didn't answer. Margaret did. A company controlled by your client. His lawyer leaned back. That was the moment I realized Daniel hadn't told his own attorney everything. Daniel finally looked at me. I was trying to protect the company. Claire had predicted that sentence months earlier. Margaret folded her hands. By secretly moving company money? It wasn't like that. Then explain it. Daniel's voice rose for the first time. Dad was letting the business stagnate. Claire fought every expansion. Someone had to think about what happens next. He turned toward me. You were going to leave this to us anyway. Us. Such a small word. Such an enormous lie. No, I said quietly. You thought eventually inheriting something meant you already owned it. Daniel stared at me. And for the first time, he had no answer. Then Margaret pulled one final document from her folder. She didn't give it to Daniel. She handed it to the bank representative. Daniel watched him read it. What is that? He asked. Margaret looked directly at my son. The reason your attempted transfer of control never actually took effect. And suddenly, Daniel looked frightened all over again. The bank representative read the document twice. Then he removed his glasses. Mr. Hale, was this provision already part of the company's governing agreement? Yes, Margaret said. It has been since Robert and Thomas restructured ownership years ago. Daniel looked irritated. What provision? Margaret turned the document toward him. You purchased an option on the shares still held in Robert's family trust. I know what I purchased? Apparently not. His attorney reached for the agreement. Margaret pointed to one paragraph. Those shares carry economic rights. They can receive distributions and eventually be transferred. But while they remain in the trust, their voting rights cannot be exercised by an outside option holder. Daniel's attorney read the paragraph. His expression changed. Daniel leaned toward him. What? You don't have Robert's votes, his attorney said. Daniel stared at him. But I have the option. An option to acquire the shares under the trust's conditions. Not an immediate right to vote them. Margaret nodded. And without those votes, Daniel needed Thomas's voting authority to claim control. Everyone looked at the authorization lying on the table. The one bearing my signature. And Robert Mercer's name beneath it. Now I understood. Daniel had built his takeover like a bridge. Northbridge money helped finance Duar. Dar secured the option on Robert's remaining shares. But those shares couldn't give Daniel the votes he needed yet. So he still needed mine. That forged authorization was the final piece. And because the witness certification couldn't survive scrutiny, neither could the authority Daniel claimed from it. The bank representative closed the folder. Until this is independently reviewed, we won't recognize any change in control based on these documents. Daniel pushed back from the table. You can't just undo everything. Margaret looked at him. There's nothing to undo. That silenced him. His attorney whispered something to him, but Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at me. You knew. Not at first. How long? Long enough. His face hardened. So you sat there for 2 weeks pretending everything was normal? I almost laughed at the accusation. You used your sister's computer to make me think she forged my signature. Daniel looked away. That wasn't why. Then why? I needed access. And Claire's laptop was convenient? He didn't answer. I leaned forward. You watched her leave this company because of what you did. His jaw tightened. She chose to leave. That sentence changed something in me. Not because it was cruel. Because I recognized the logic behind it. Every decision Daniel made had someone else's name attached to the consequence. I was getting old. Claire was difficult. The company was stagnating. The system made an error. Robert's credentials shouldn't have remained active. Nothing was ever Daniel's choice. Margaret gathered the Northbridge records. This meeting is over. Daniel's attorney raised a hand. Before anyone makes further statements, I need to speak privately with my client. Margaret nodded. You should. The bank representative stood. He told me the disputed account changes would remain frozen while the documents were reviewed. Then he looked at Daniel. And given the transactions presented today, our compliance department will need the complete Northbridge and Dar records. Daniel's face tightened again. That was when I realized the failed takeover wasn't the end of this. It was the beginning of the accounting. Outside the conference room, Claire was waiting for me. She hadn't wanted to sit inside. When she saw my face, she stood. Is it over? I looked back through the glass wall at my son. No. Then I looked at my daughter. But he doesn't own the company. Claire closed her eyes. For a moment, I expected relief. Instead, she whispered, Dad, I never cared who owned it. And suddenly I understood there was still one thing I hadn't made right. The accounting took 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks taught me something revenge stories rarely mention. Justice doesn't arrive with dramatic music. It arrives in emails, bank statements, lawyers' calls, and numbers you wish belonged to someone else's family. The review traced more than $200,000 in questionable payments through Northbridge. Some had gone toward legitimate research, enough to make the company look real. But roughly $140,000 had eventually flowed toward Dar Holdings. Daniel hadn't simply tried to take control. He had used money connected to Hale and Mercer to help finance the structure he intended to use against it. Margaret advised me not to discuss the investigation publicly. The bank froze the disputed transactions. Daniel was removed from every position of financial authority, and the evidence was turned over for formal review. What happened next would be decided by accountants, attorneys, and people whose job was to determine exactly where bad judgment ended and fraud began. I didn't need to decide that anymore. I had another conversation to face. Claire was sitting on my back porch when I brought out 2 cups of coffee. The same daughter who had warned me. The same daughter I'd accused. I sat beside her. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, I owe you more than an apology. She looked down at her coffee. I don't want the company, Dad. I know. No, I don't think you do. She turned toward me. I wanted you to believe me before there was a video proving I deserved to be believed. That hurt. Because there was nothing unfair about it. I trusted Daniel because he made things easy for me, I said. You asked questions I didn't want to answer. Claire's eyes filled. And every time you challenged me, I called it jealousy. You did. I was wrong. She nodded. She didn't rush to forgive me. I'm grateful she didn't. Some wounds deserve more than one conversation. Over the following months, we started having dinner again. At first, once every 2 weeks. Then, every Sunday. I never asked Claire to return to Hale and Mercer. Eventually, she asked me. Not for Daniel's position. For her old one. She came back with one condition. No more family exceptions. I smiled. What does that mean? If I question something, you don't get to end the conversation by saying we're family. I held out my hand. Deal. She ignored it and hugged me instead. I still think about Daniel. Of course I do. He is my son. Justice doesn't erase 39 years of birthdays, scraped knees, Christmas mornings, and memories. But love doesn't require blindness. And forgiveness, if it ever comes, does not mean returning someone's keys. Daniel thought the greatest thing he could inherit from me was my company. He was wrong. A legacy isn't the building with your name on it. It isn't the bank account. It isn't even the business you spent 34 years creating. It's the trust people attach to your name after you leave the room. Daniel nearly destroyed his trying to take mine. And Claire taught me something I should have understood years earlier. Sometimes the child who challenges you isn't fighting against you. They're the only one still fighting for you. So let me ask you this. If your own child betrayed you the way Daniel betrayed me, could you ever trust them again? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, and the truths we sometimes see too late.